Good evening to everyone in Alberta, Canada, and beyond. It is Wednesday, February 7th, 2024, and I'm Kerry Lambert, and I welcome you to an online webinar, Evening of Solutions for a New Alberta, brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project, also known as APP. APP's purpose is to educate, inspire, and unite all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect the prosperity, individual freedoms, rights, and sovereignty by empowering the Alberta government to restructure Alberta's relationship with Canada. Of course, we couldn't do this without your help. If you can, please share this webinar. And if you can, tell us in your comments which city or town you're watching from, as well as what platform you're watching from. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Rumble. And it looks like we had another Rumble issue that I got to try and fix for the next broadcast. As well as after this live, we're also on other video and audio sites like Apple, Spotify, and Vimeo. These webinars do take time and effort. We're looking for sponsorships for our webinars. If you'd like to sponsor an upcoming webinar, you can get in contact with us at, I always have this not ready. Get a hold of us at contact@albertaprosperity.com and tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. Maybe that's another thing that you could be doing as well. APP is membership driven with a goal of 1 million plus members to help steer the political process. APP memberships are 1 year for $20, 2 years for $30, 3 years for $40, or you can make a donation at albertaprosperityproject.com. On our website here, the albertaprosperityproject.com, you can also go and look at our events that are coming up. We've actually got a lot of events coming up, which is awesome. It's beginning of the year. Things are happening. We've got a pension plan tour that is going out, and we've got Tanner Today and Nadine Wellwood and even Corey Morgan are out speaking on that. And I believe our very own Chris Scott will be going out to one or two of those just to say hello to everybody and make sure that everybody is all happy with the direction that APP is going. And we've got some chapter meetings. We also have this weekend in Grand Prairie, we have an event going on here. The River is Going to Break tour, or The River is Going to Break in Grand Prairie, featuring the Steve Castle Band. There's tickets are $35, trivia and a prize, as well as just a place to get out, talk to like-minded people, talk about what's going on in Alberta, and just go out and have a lot of fun. And if this one turns out really well, I think we're going to be doing a lot more of these across the province. So that's something that you could be looking forward to if you're up in that area. As well as I know we've got Alberta Prosperity Project APP Pension, if you want to call it the Alberta Pension Plan tour going on. And the next one is this weekend or next weekend, I guess. In Caroline on the 17th, and in Calgary on the 21st, and in Westlock on the 6th. On SAR on the 2nd. So all you need to do is just go onto the website, check things out, and find out what's going on there. So tonight's episode, I'm just going to turn that off there. Tonight's episode is called The Results of the National Citizens Inquiry with Ken Drysdale, who's the chairman of the Independent Commissioners at the National Citizens Inquiry. We also have APP's interim CEO, Christopher Scott, who will be joining us as well. Chris also testified as a witness at the NCI in Red Deer in April 2023. This is a live webinar, so we encourage you to ask questions and make comments throughout this presentation. Just put 3 question marks before your question so it's flagged, and we can quickly review the questions. And with that, I'm now going to bring on Ken and Chris. Good
Hi,
evening,
Gary.
gentlemen. How are you doing?
Hi, Ken.
Howdy, everybody.
Chris looks like he's moving really, really fast. Where are you?
Where am I?
Where are you?
I am blazing down the highway towards Edmonton on Highway 16 in my daughter's car with my son.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out. I know you are a busy guy and you're running all over the province, and so thank you so much for taking the time and coming out. And Ken is in Manitoba. How are you doing, Ken?
Wonderful. We've had incredible weather the last couple of weeks. We didn't get the minus 43 that you guys had in Edmonton a week ago when I was there, or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was.
That was awesome.
I don't know how that happens, because I grew up in Manitoba, and every year there'd be a week where it was minus 40.
Oh, yeah.
start and you try and do the 3-point turn across a residential road, you break an axle because you end up hitting these ruts. That doesn't seem to have happened this year.
That happens in Manitoba, and still you guys have mosquitoes the size of cats. I don't know how that works.
I don't know. It doesn't kill them. It just doesn't kill them. Although I don't think we have we don't have the killer snakes. We don't have the killer spiders and whatever else that usually come with really warm temperatures. So having done that little bit of banter, we want to get down and talk about what happened at the NCI. So we've had you on before. We talked about a little bit of what was going on after the National Citizens Inquiry, and maybe you can give just a brief update on what happened. Bring our readers up to or watchers up to speed. Kind of what happened maybe in the May to September timeframe. And then, of course, now you guys ended up just releasing a new email blast out that talked a little bit about what the NCI is up to, and maybe we can talk more about that.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, a lot has happened at the NCI since May, as you know. We carried out the hearings right across Canada. We visited 8 cities from coast to coast in Canada. And in each city, we spent 3 days, and I think every day was about 15 hours of testimony that we listened to. So at the end of April, we completed our hearings in Ottawa, and then we started the process of creating the commissioner's report. And we completed that and issued it to the public on November 28th, 2023. It is currently available for free on our website, the nationalcitizensinquiry.ca, and there we go. Under Commissioner's Report, you can select that. And it's in a couple of different ways you can download it. You can download it as one ginormous file, and I'll get to that in a second, or you can actually download it in a couple of different files.
Okay.
And the reason I say it's ginormous is, of course, our assignment was absolutely enormous. We weren't restricted. We weren't told to look at one little thing or this thing or that thing. What we were told to do was we were told to interview the Canadians that came forward, and 305 Canadians were interviewed during the hearings. There were thousands more we just couldn't fit into the schedule. But we had 305 sworn witnesses who testified in a semi-judicial process where it was done before the public. The witnesses were questioned by legal counsel, and then they were also questioned by the commissioners. All of those testimonies were videotaped. They're online. You can get them on the National Citizens Inquiry website again. And all of their testimonies, their sworn testimonies, were transcribed. So you can actually see the transcriptions of every word that every person said, or you can watch them by video.
That's right.
So the culmination of that was that the report is 5,342 pages long, and that's that's pretty intimidating. But really we designed the report for everybody to be able to easily use. And what I mean by that is, the report body, the part of the report that describes what we did and describes the testimony we received and comes up with conclusions, is 643 pages, and it's extensively indexed. So if you go to the table of contents in the report, the table of contents alone is like 15 pages long, right at the very beginning. And what I'm suggesting people do in order to tackle this thing is that they go to the table of contents and they look up Section 8. And what Section 8 is it's indexed to subject areas, and all it does is it lists each one of the almost 400 recommendations that the report makes. And so what a person can do is they can go into that table of contents under Section 8, and you could just look for topics that you're interested in. And you can see you're paging up right now to it.
Yeah.
And you could just see how extensive. There we go, Section 8. So, for instance, if you're interested in the justice system, you can click on that and go to it. You can look at democratic institutions. You can look at schools. You can look at mandates. You can look at churches. You can look at the costs Canada. And if you go to that section in section 8, you can just read the recommendations, and usually it's probably 2 or 3 pages under each section of recommendations. There you go. And then once you've done that, let's say that what you've got on the screen right now is section 8.21, and it's called the neglect and isolation of seniors in Canada.
Yeah.
So once you read those recommendations, you might wonder, well, how did they come up with that? Well, if you go to section 7 and under the same number 721, you'll find out how we came up with those recommendations, who testified in that area, what were our discussions, what did we consider, and then we come up with conclusions, and you get those recommendations again. So now what you've done is very quickly and easily, you've focused on an area that you're interested in. You've learned everything that we had to say about that, and you can also visit the website to watch the actual testimonies, and we list in section 7 who testified for what. So you can watch those, you can read their transcripts, and then you can look for another topic that you might be interested in section 8. Maybe you've got right there, undermining democratic institutions. We got pandemic in the workplace. So it's really set up so that a person can easily access things that are of interest, and they can enter in a very easy way, just looking at a list of recommendations, and then they can find out the reasoning behind it, and then they can move on to the next and the next and the next. So it's really set up to be user-friendly report to read. And like I said, it might be 5,342 pages, but it's really indexed well, and you can just go in and pick out things that you might be interested in.
Yeah. And I know, I was just going to say, I know Chris was one of the witnesses, and granted, in his testimony, he was specifically talking about how his business was affected. But some of the comments that he may have made about healthcare or how the government was handling things, I'm assuming that would end up being somewhere in this report and basically indexed and to say, this was brought up. And
yeah, if you page through, just go down slowly through that table of contents you're in, and you could the people could just see the dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of different areas that you can go look at. Here's just slowing it down. You got non-pharmaceutical interventions. You've got early treatments. We've got Canada's approval of pharmaceuticals. You've got how the mandates affected businesses like Chris's. You have how it affected churches, because we had a lot of testimony on that. There's just dozens and dozens and dozens of different topics that cover from one end of the Canadian society to the other. So we were non-restricted in what we had to deal with.
Yeah.
So Ken, this is all people can access all of this information for free, correct?
Absolutely. It's absolutely free on the National Citizens Inquiry website, which is www.nationalcitizensinquiry.ca. And what they're displaying on the screen right now is one of the tabs, and it's called Commissioner's Report. And you can see you can download it here. You can download the full report, which is a big download, or you can download volumes 1 and 2, which is essentially the summary and analysis, and volume 3 are the witness transcripts, sworn witness transcripts. So we made it so that if you had a bit of a slower connection, you didn't have to take the whole thing all at once. You could just take bits and pieces of it. And again, other thing I said is it's going to be on Amazon Books shortly. And the pricing, by the way, will reflect the cost. It does not include any profit or anything for the commission in there, to my knowledge. So
on that note, I just want to point out that, while this is free for everyone to access, the cost to do this, it was not free. It cost a lot of money. So, Ken, for those who are appreciative of what the NCI is doing and they want to help you guys continue to do this work, how can they support the NCI?
Again, on the homepage of the nationalcitizensinquiry.ca, you can see there's a donate button there, and you can click that and donate to the National Citizens Inquiry. And I think it's important because you hear, and people have a right to ask hard questions. And just with regard to the cost, if you go to home, if you click on the home button, and then that should take you down to donate. Where it should be. Yeah, I found it. It should be at the bottom. Yeah. So I think it's important to note that when we were on the road and we were going city to city, it was costing us about $33,000 a city, and now that included, the cost to rent the facilities, the cost of the hotels, that kind of thing. But I can tell you, I am the chairman of the commissioners, and my salary for all of those hearings and for the 1,500 hours I put into putting into the report, my salary was $1, and NCI hasn't paid me yet. So we're not wasting money, folks. What you've invested in is, what you've really invested in here. This has not been done yet in the world. This is the first in the world, and it is an encyclopedia of what happened in Canada due to the mandates. It's an unmatched resource in the entire world. I mean, this is a template again. It's a Canadian first in the world, and I'm sure it's going to be followed by a lot of different countries and a lot of different organizations in the world.
Well, you definitely took the first question I was going to ask is where else is this being done, and you just answered it, that basically Canada is the only place that's doing this.
Yeah, well, it's like the truckers. It happened here in Canada first. Yeah. And now it's happening all over the world. I mean, and even in different areas, you see the truckers going down to Texas. You see what's going on with the tractors all throughout Europe. That was all inspired by the Canadian heroes, the Canadian truckers.
Right. You are right.
So on that note, number one, why are we doing this, and why should we continue to do this? And then number two, what did we find out?
Yeah.
Those are really big questions. First off, the why is because the government isn't going to do it. And if they do it, it will be a sham, just like the Rollo inquiry. The Rollo inquiry, if you recall the conclusions, it may have been illegal, it may not have been illegal. And that was it. And then it was up to a federal court, almost a year later to come and say that it was unconstitutional. And when you look at all the scandals in the Trudeau government, and it's not, I hate to say it, but it wasn't just the Liberals and the NDP. The PCs didn't stand up. They were not counted during this thing. They did not stand up and say anything against it. So the reason it's necessary is that first it's contemporaneous. In other words, the earlier to an event that you can get witness testimony, the more accurate it is and the more healing it is. Not just for the, there's some healing to the witness when they can come out and say what happened to them, and they start to discover there's other people who experience the same things, but it's also healing for the country, where people can start to come together. And I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and said, I guess I wasn't crazy. This happened to me too. And what happened was so unbelievable. I mean, look at in Alberta and in Ontario, for that matter, the government executed 2 people. They executed Sheila Lewis in Alberta, and they executed, and gosh, I apologize, I can't remember the young man's name who needed a kidney transplant in Ontario and was left to die, just like Sheila Lewis was. Yeah. So they this was not a little thing. Just about every institution in Canada failed Canadians. The medical profession, the justice system. The justice system was hiding behind mootness, and they were hiding behind judicial decrees and all kinds of crazy things. The banking system failed us. We all learned that. Your churches failed you. Your businesses failed you. So this was not a little thing. It's incredible that some private citizens group was forced to step in and do this, because first off, there was nobody who wasn't tainted by the illegality and the criminality of what happened, except for the citizens themselves. And secondly, you don't have to look very far to see how corrupt the different governments are with regard to reporting about their own malfeasance.
Just on the note, a note on the healing aspect of the NCI. I can attest to witnessing that when I was there. Like, I watched that happen in real time, right before my eyes. As people were sharing their stories during the testimony, and then after, just mingling with people. That was a big deal, and it was a big deal for a lot of people.
Yeah, and those testimonies are life-changing. And we were talking earlier about the report, and it's big, and this is how you should navigate it. But one of the things I always say to folks is just go to the National Citizens Inquiry website and go to the homepage and you'll see there's a little click there for hearings, and click down, and then it lists all the cities. And if you click on that, it brings you up a list of everybody who testified in that city. So if you click on hearings at the very top, yeah, hearings, and then just choose. There you go. So now if you click on Red Deer, for instance. Yeah, and now, so this lists all in order of how they testified, and you can click on any of these and it takes you to a separate web page. It has their video on it, has their transcripts on it. And so what I say to people is, maybe before you start reading, just pick 3 testimonies. I don't care where, I don't care what city, and I don't care who you, there's Chris Scott. And just listen to those 3 testimonies, and it will change your life, and it will really deeply affect you. I think all of us who volunteered in this thing, particularly the 4 commissioners, no one else sat and listened to every single testimony from day 1 to day 23, other than the commissioners. And I can tell you, I've been questioned on this many, many times as to, what happened at the end of the day, and did you folks go out and talk about what you heard? And no, these testimonies were so heartbreaking, so riveting, so earth-shattering that, at the end of the day, first, we were exhausted. But secondly, we just needed to console each other. We'd go out for dinner and we would just talk about children and grandchildren and those kinds of things, just for you needed an emotional break, each night, because these things are so incredibly heartbreaking, and in all kinds of ways, from people being executed like Sheila Lewis, and people being denied services, people. I could go on all night with the horrendous stories that I've heard, in the callousness of people. And I remember distinctly one story from the lady who testified in Saskatoon. Her mother went to get the shots, and over lunch hour, and I can't remember. I think it was Cindy Stevenson. I can't quite remember, but her mother had gone to get the shot over the lunch period, and she was texting back and forth with her mother. No, it wasn't Cindy. Okay. And what happened was there was a lineup of people to get the shot, and when her mother's turn came, she went behind a little curtain. They stuck the needle in her, and just before that, the mother had texted her daughter and said, "Oh, it's my turn now. Everything's fine." And then she never heard again from her mother until her brother phoned and said that 7 minutes after they put the needle in her arm, she dropped dead on the floor of the Shoppers Drug Mart in Saskatoon. And what was more shocking than that even is some days later, she got a text from just a citizen who happened to be there at the time. And the citizen said, when her mother hit the floor dead, stone cold dead, not a single person who was standing in the line waiting their turn got out of the line. That was the level of terror. Yeah, that was the level. No. You know what it is? That was the level of terror.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
That $1.4 billion shoveled into the CBC can do to citizens. Look at Joseph Goebbels has nothing. He gives up nothing to the CBC and the mainstream media for what they did. And by the way, in the report, in the commissioner's report, there's an entire section on media, and there's a specific section on the CBC, and there's a specific section on the so-called private mainstream media as well. So I'm not sure it was so much sheepish behavior, but they had been terrified, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
Well, they're still doing that. They're still doing that on TV. As a matter of fact, I know there's a couple of people that are commenting too that a relative can't get a new kidney because they still didn't get the shot. And here we are, like 2 years later, 3 years, 2 years. Like, what is going on?
Well, that was one of the things that was particularly heinous about what those people did to Sheila Lewis. Yeah. You see, they demanded that she get the COVID shot in 2022, in the summer or fall of 2022. And we already knew by that time that first, the vaccines were unsafe. Yeah. Second, that they hadn't been tested on very many people, and the results were fraudulent or supposedly fraudulent.
Yeah.
We knew that it didn't stop transmission. We knew that it didn't stop infection.
Yeah.
And yet they still insisted that she get it. And that's not all, folks. It even gets worse. She got tested for antibodies to COVID-19, and they proved that she was immune to getting COVID-19 because she had it already.
Yeah.
But these tin-plated gods practicing in our government hospitals decided that no, they knew better, even though the rest of the world knew that it was all fraudulent. And they stood by, and our court stood by, because she took it to court, King's Court. She took it to the Appeal Court of Alberta, and they turned it down. And the cowards in the Supreme Court of Canada didn't have the courage to take up the case. So she ended up dying. Now, it was pointed out to me just a little while ago that right at the very end, just before she was going to die, the Alberta doctors reversed themselves and said, "Oh, come on in, we'll do it now." But it was already too late, and she died.
Well, there is a little more to that, Ken. So I'm going to point out there is one more thing that we knew by then as well, and that was that there was a lot of people making billions of dollars because of this. But anyway, maybe that probably has nothing to do with it. But with the Sheila Annette Lewis thing, and I would say anybody who watches Sheila Annette Lewis's testimony at the NCI and has dry eyes afterwards is a robot. So our friend Dr. Dennis Modry, he was advocating for Sheila Annette Lewis. As you know, Dr. Modry, he was chair of the transplant committee or board or whatever for years in Alberta, and so he was advocating very strongly for Sheila. And he was successful in getting her back on the, like they agreed to give her some lungs. But what the problem is, whoever the director was at the time wouldn't put her on, it was some sort of a mechanical device that helped you breathe while you were waiting for a lung transplant. And they wouldn't let her do that because she didn't meet the criteria or something like that. So she was going to get some lungs, but they just chose not to keep her alive long enough to be the recipient of those lungs. So it's even worse than people realize.
Yeah. I mean, and the callousness of this, and you know, these are supposed to be scientists. And if we know anything about science, I'm a professional engineer, as you know, so I'm what they call a practical scientist. If there's one thing about science, it's never settled. In other words, it's always developing. It's like the weather. It's always changing. And for these people to have made this requirement and not have been up to date with the actual evidence on this thing is criminal, in my opinion. Absolutely criminal.
What? No, that doesn't make any sense, Ken. I thought science nowadays was all about a consensus and going with the majority opinion.
You know, folks don't realize that this has been going on for a long time. And you know, we are replacing, and we have been replacing for probably 3-4 decades, actual science and scientific thought with dogma. And I saw this in my own experience already going back 20-25 years. You know, I spent a lot of time in the high Arctic, and I'm considered an expert in the design of buildings and permafrost in Arctic places. And I remember getting asked to go to a Rotary Club once and give a speech on things in the Arctic. And you know, they asked questions, and then at the end of the day, there was a lineup of people there. And some fella came up to me and he said, you know, I had made a statement that the permafrost is not deteriorating the way the government says. I've drilled holes in every single community, just except one in Nunavut. And I can tell you with my own eyes, it's a lie. Anyway, that's one fella comes up to me, and just to show dogma, you know, he comes up and he says, "Mr. Drysdale, you know, I listened to your presentation. I thought it was really great. But when you made those comments about permafrost, I knew you knew nothing about the Arctic." And I looked at him and I said, "Have you ever been there?" And of course, all that is dogma. You know, the CBC, the CTV, National Geographic, David Suzuki.
Saw it on David Suzuki that one time, that one show, and that's gospel.
Oh yeah, you know where they. I always remember. My wife will testify to this. Where I think it was the American Audubon Society was talking about the melting Arctic, and they showed a polar bear lonely out on a piece of ice floating out into the ocean. He's going to drown. Well, the fact of the matter is, polar bears go out on that water. They swim 100 miles or so, and they're on ice, and that's their environment. But people took it as they were going to die. So you know, we've replaced. And it's been going on for a long time. We've replaced dogma, science with dogma, and it's just amazing to me. Or I should say that I'm very grateful that somebody didn't start calling us witches. You know, if you weren't wearing a mask or you didn't get the magic vaccination, because that's where it got to. Neighbors were snitching on neighbors. Parents were going against children. Children were going against themselves, their spouses. Communities were tearing themselves apart. You know that every segment. I remember during the NCI, we had testimony from a number of people from the Canadian Armed Forces, and they were talking about how many members of the Canadian Armed Forces we lost to mandates, early retirement, etc. And what they said is the Canadian Armed Forces lost more people due to the mandates than we had lost since World War II. That's how significant this stuff was.
That's insanity.
Was that like that all over the world? Like basically anybody that didn't get the jab and was working, say, in the military or working in a hospital or anything like that, they lost their jobs and basically, you know, were they injured? You know, these are types of questions that I get like all the time.
Yeah, and
all we hear about is what's happened in Canada.
Well, there were places in the world where the same thing happened, and there were other places that didn't. And, you know, we had testimony. Actually, he testified 3 times, Dr. Denis Rancourt, Canadian scientist. He testified about all-cause mortality in the world. Mm-hmm. And according to his research, he said there were no excess deaths due to COVID. When you looked at the timing of when the deaths occurred, they started a week to 2 weeks after vaccine pushes and vaccine rollouts. And the biggest jump was in March of 2020, when the government imposed these insane lockdowns and mandates initially, and people were dying of loneliness, suicide, drug overdoses, and there was a
lack of care.
Yeah, lack of care. And you know, people don't understand something about that. When the government announced on, I think it was March 14th or March 20th, when they announced the lockdowns and mandates, Canada is a country of 40 million people. Yeah. And at that point, one 82-year-old person supposedly had died of COVID, 1 out of 40 million. And they supposedly had 1,200 infection cases, which I don't know how they confirmed at that point, that they were actually infected with COVID. So that's in question. But 1,240 million.
Yeah.
You've got to get your mind around it. And then they lock down like that. You know, well, we have, I don't know how many it is, 85,000 people dying a year from heart disease or obesity and drug overdose.
Again,
medical malpractice.
You did all the reports, so you know what it was. But I remember vividly, and I'm sure everybody watching remembers vividly, those first 2 weeks, we didn't know what was happening. The propaganda that was coming out was everyone's going to die. We saw the videos from China and people literally just dying on the street. So everyone was scared, and it just kind of made sense to lock down everybody. Well, but you know, that should have quickly, 2 weeks after that, kind of went, somebody died.
Especially when we found out that was all fake.
Yeah. Well,
that should have been the biggest red flag. That should have been end of story right there. If they're faking these things to try and scare us, obviously it's not scary enough to be scared of.
No, and you know, the other thing was, and I think it was a testimony by Dr. Marcus. I could be wrong about that. He was in the virtual hearings. And what he said was, and he showed it, that starting in January 2020, the Canadian government, Health Canada, had all the statistics of all of the deaths that were being reported around the world. So January, February, March, and those statistics showed already, it was already a known fact that the people most at risk were over 82 years of age and they had comorbidities.
Yeah.
So why would we have to lock down 18-year-olds in Lower? Why would we have to lock down 25-year-olds? They knew this information before they locked down, and they did it anyway. So I can't suggest to Canadians what in the heck happened there, why they did such a thing, but the evidence is clear. You know, they knew. We didn't know as Canadians because all we knew was what the CBC was telling us. It was all lies. But the government knew. And they knew starting January, February, March what was going on.
Yeah. Well, and even Dr. John Campbell, who I'm sure you may have talked to or at least know of him in the UK, you know, at first he was like totally on board saying, yeah, everybody's got to be locked down, blah, blah, blah. And as he did his research on this, he came up and said, no, there is surprising evidence that this is not the way it is. And he basically did like a mini version of the NCI, going out and talking to everybody. And again, this is one guy doing it in the UK. And here you guys, and again, kudos to the amazing work that you guys did with the NCI across Canada, talking to 300 plus people and hearing different stories, not just health related stories, but how mental language, how it affected businesses, how it affected healthcare. So,
well, yeah, and it was amazing. It was amazing how we had testimony from, I don't remember her name. I think it was in Toronto, and I apologize, but there was 305 witnesses, and I have a hard time sometimes. Yeah. But there was a lady and her husband in Toronto. She testified. I think it was in the fall, like in September, October of 2019. She and her husband got a loan from the Business Development Bank of Canada to start a spa business. Now, for folks that don't know, the Business Development Bank of Canada is the federal government supposedly lending money to small business. So they got this loan from the federal government to start this business. Well, in March, of course, the same government that loaned them the money and said their business was viable, locked them down, closed them up, and then sued them for their money and forced them into bankruptcy. So, it's that one isn't the worst story, but for some reason or other, that one really stood out in my mind that, the government obviously thought they were viable, but then they locked them down and sued them for their money back and bankrupted them. So, I mean, that's what your federal government was doing, just one of the examples of millions.
We have a lot of people asking for different webinars and different topics. And again, like you said, one of the topics ends up being, I'm a small business owner. I ended up collecting the CERB. I had to use it in order to continue on my business. Now the loan is due. I have no money. I'm now forced to lose my business. And I actually think 2024 may be the year that there's a lot of businesses that go on.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And you know what? There's a lot of small businesses that are going to be suing over it. My initial foray into this was over 2 years ago, and I wrote what's become known as the 89-page report. And what that was, it was a report allegations about the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, that thing, when I wrote it out of naivety, I didn't really think it was going to go anywhere. I thought I would take it to the police and they would investigate. Of course, they didn't. But what happened is Canadians investigated, and I think that report has now been downloaded, copied, printed somewhere around 2.5 million times. Yeah. And it's been delivered to every police station in Canada, every MP, every MLA, every doctor, it's just amazing, But again, Canadians took the initiative there. Yeah. I mean, the government didn't want to hear any of it. It was really interesting. I had a meeting with MPs, and one MP I met with, and I asked him, so what is, and he happened to be a progressive conservative, and I said, so what are the progressive conservative members of parliament thinking about this national citizens inquiry? Well, we've been talking about it behind closed doors. And I said, well, will you commit to presenting it in parliament for us? And of course, it's, we'll have to see what happens and all this other kind of stuff. And it's amazing. This wasn't just an NDP and a Liberal problem. It was also a PC problem. It was a banker problem. It was a church problem. It was a medical problem. It was a finance problem. Name it, and it failed us.
So, with all that said, what were the results of the National Citizens Inquiry? What were the recommendations?
Well, there are just about 400 recommendations, so I can't go through them all here. But they're written. I want to remind folks, we wrote them in plain English. There's nothing fancy. There's no $1,000,000 lawyer words in there. They're written black and white in plain English, and we actually give you real recommendations that can be used. And you know, one of the other questions I get asked all the time is, you know, Ken, well, what do you think is going to happen with this report? And do you think the government's going to do something with it? And I have to laugh. The government's not going to do anything with this unless they're forced to. And so people should think of the National Citizen Inquiry Report as a couple of things. First, it's a contemporaneous historical document of sworn testimonies of Canadians from across the country. This will be taught or in schools at some time in the future once all the politics is gone on this. Secondly, and more importantly, people should consider the National Citizens Inquiry Report to be a toolbox. And what do I mean by that? You know, I've been involved in construction in over 40 years, 42, 43 years now, I believe, maybe a little more. And, you know, I've been on hundreds, if not thousands of construction sites, and I have never yet seen a carpenter come onto a construction site in the morning, put their toolbox down on the floor, go home, come back at the end of the day and expect the toolbox to have gone out and built the house. And so Canadians should be thinking about this National Citizens Report as a toolbox, but you have to pick it up. You have to open it. You have to know what's in it. You have to copy it. You have to give it to your doctor. You have to give it to your MP, your MLA. When you're standing in line at the grocery store, you should say to the person standing behind you or in front of you, hey, what do you know about this NCI thing I've been hearing about? And start a conversation. So it is the NCI report in and of itself is not the solution. Canadians are the solution. And they have to pick that thing up. They've got to educate themselves. They have to educate people around them. And really, they need to be outraged about what happened. And believe me, if you read this report, you will be outraged. And so one of the things I always say is, and I've stolen this from Akiro Yamamoto from World War II. You know, he's famous for a quote that he made, and I've kind of changed it a little bit. And I always say that I hope my greatest hope is that the NCI report awakens the sleeping giant of Canadians and fills them with a terrible rage.
Yeah.
And if it does, we will have justice. You know, people will get involved with organizations like the APP, Alberta Prosperity Project, or Manitoba Stronger Together is another one, which is they're all grassroots organizations that are aiming to take back political power and give it back to the people in a grassroots way.
Yeah. I'm always curious as to, and somebody says to me, you know, why are you involved in this? And my life hasn't been affected at all, and I'm not going to get involved. And it's like, man, I wish I was you, because everyone I know has been affected, and I don't even know how they could not get involved in something like this.
You know, everybody is affected, even though people that continue to work. I mean, look at the Canadian national debt prior to the COVID fiasco was I think I'm going by my memory again. It's in the report. I think it was about $640 billion. It's now 1.1 or 1.2 trillion dollars. So what took, you know, it took us 150 years plus or minus to get to where it was at 600 and something billion, and we have nothing to show for almost doubling that debt, you know, in a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and we have nothing to show for it except broken homes, broken businesses, broken education system, broken medical system. I mean, the confidence that Canadians have in healthcare is almost zero. I think they have more confidence in used car salesmen now than they do in medical, and for good reason. When you see what happened during the pandemic.
Yeah, there are people making those comments as well. We're about 45 minutes. I'm going to actually start to go through some of the comments. Chris, did you want to make anything or say anything before I get into some of the comments and questions?
No, I'm actually, you know, whenever I think about this, like Ken was mentioning or you mentioned that not everyone was affected. And
yeah.
affect me, well, whatever. And it actually makes me think about myself and how I was before my business was affected by the mandates.
That's true.
There's all sorts of societal issues that we should have been involved in, and we weren't because they didn't affect us, and our world just went on. Kept turning, and things just continued to move along for us. Meanwhile, there's other people that really needed some advocacy. They really needed some help, but we didn't do it because it didn't affect us. And now, we're on this in this strange place where we're very aware of these things that happen to people around us. And in another time, years ago, we might not have been so receptive to do something about it, but that's changed. And so just to think that there's so many Canadians out there that actually know that people are dying. For instance, there's someone in my town who, they literally said that I should be drug out into the street and shot because I wasn't following what the government was saying to do. And they commented once, like, what the heck? Why is everybody dying? Everyone around me is dying. What's going on? And we're like, well, what's changed?
Yeah.
And I experience this all the time. Oh, we have, there's record numbers of certain illnesses and diseases. We didn't have that before. Oh, what's going on? Well, I don't know, but what's changed? Is there a temporal correlation between that and something else that's happening or happened in the last 3 years? But they just don't get it. And I realized that at some point, we almost have to just forget about those people.
Yeah.
Not that we don't care about them. We have to forget about trying to reach them and just move ahead and push ahead with solutions, dragging them kicking and screaming if we have to, because, if we don't, nothing's going to change. But it is really frustrating to be so aware of these things and also watch other people completely ignore reality to the point of almost delusion.
Yeah.
Well, before we go on, I just want to put a cap on what Chris was saying. If people think it's over, January 15th, 2024, in the Winnipeg Free Press, which is one of the larger newspapers in Canada, who, by the way, according to the Frontier Centre, half of their budget comes from the government. But in any case, January 15th, 2024, Winnipeg Free Press, go look it up. They have an article called "The Unwanted Unvaxxed." And the author of that article goes on and talks about how evil the unvaxxed are. And she dreams and almost lusts over what will be written on their tombstones when they die from COVID because they didn't take the vaccine. Now, interestingly enough, Manitoba Stronger Together, the group, took issue with this and went on a letter writing campaign, not so much to the editors. It was done to the editors, but you know who we wrote the letters to? We wrote them to the advertisers. And I guess it's cold comfort, but we did get an apology. But that is the state of things today. People still believe these lies. And they still hold these grudges or these hatreds for people who stood up like Chris did. And it's just incredible. And that's still going on today. So folks, it isn't over.
And if you peel everything back, Ken, that comes down to we're not fighting like between vaccinated and unvaccinated or right and left or liberal and conservative. You peel all of those things back and it comes down to we are fighting a battle between the idea that human beings are sacred and humanity is important, and alternatively that humans are a disease and policy should be anti-human in nature. That's what this all comes down to, and it's actually quite a little bit frightening.
Well, you're right, Chris. And one thing that people don't understand, and I want to make them understand it, is that when the government put in force all of the mandates and the Emergencies Measures Act, what they did was they changed you from being a sovereign human being with rights to a chattel. In other words, you were a slave. You couldn't say, you couldn't go where you wanted to go. You couldn't make a living. You couldn't refuse to get an injection. You were spat on, you were beaten, and I'm not exaggerating because I heard lots of testimony on this.
Yeah.
And so they changed free Canadians from free human beings to chattel or slaves overnight.
Lots of questions in regards to, I'm just going to kind of wrap it up into a bubble. Lawsuits or class action lawsuits against the government, against employers. Can you make any comment on that? Whether or not you had anything in the NCI with that, or maybe stuff that you know?
There are class action lawsuits coming or in progress in just about every province, or I should say every province in Canada. Fortunately or unfortunately, that's a provincial matter, so each province is different. Yeah. My suggestion for folks to find out what's going on in your province is to get a hold of your local freedom groups. In Alberta, there's several of them. In Manitoba, there's several of them. In Ontario, there's a number. So I think that's what you need to do. You need to get a hold of the freedom groups, the people are on the ground, to find out how you can become a part of it. Because in a lot of these class action lawsuits, in a class action lawsuit, you don't actually have to be an active member of it. If you're part of the class, in other words, someone that lost a job or someone who fits the class that is being sued for, when they are successful, you're automatically entitled to compensation from whatever the pot is. And so you have to make yourself known to the people doing it. But in any case, these class actions are starting all over the country. And it's not just class actions, there's civil lawsuits. And people are already starting to refer to things like the NCI report or the 89-page investigative report in trial for evidence. So we're in an exciting time, folks. I mean, human rights commissions are ruling against government. There's a union, the Purelator Union, Teamsters Union in BC ruled against Purelator's rule where they were taking people off of the job. And we had somebody who was a Purelator employee testify to NCI. So that ruling came out, and so you're going to start seeing these things really start to ripple across the country.
Yeah.
So I'll make a quick comment on what's going on in Alberta here. So Ken, I'm sure you already know this, but I'm one of the co-lead plaintiffs in a class action lawsuit against the Alberta government, which actually puts me in quite an awkward position. But we are suing the government on behalf of every business in Alberta that was affected by the mandates and the restrictions. So any business that was impacted, that was closed, whatever. That's Rebecca Ingram and I are the lead plaintiffs in that. And I believe that our lawyer, our law firm, Rath and Associates, our Rath and Company, have just put their the page and the intake form is live now. So you can find that at rathandcompany.com. In addition, our friend Leighton Gray, he has a number of actions that he's pursuing. You can check his stuff out at gwsllp.ca. Both of those firms are extremely active here in Alberta in class action litigation resulting from what the government did and employers did over the COVID stuff. So you can find a lot of information there.
Yeah, and I'm actually just putting those up right now so that people can grab that.
And as for groups, Ken mentioned to check out your local groups to see what's going on. In Alberta here, we have a freedom calendar, and it has listed dates and locations for all sorts of events that are happening in Alberta. And Kerry, do you have the link for that?
I actually have the window open, and I'll put that up right now.
Perfect. So this is just some resources that you folks can use to help navigate your way through this.
Freedomcalendar.net. And in this case, I just happen to have the page open on the Alberta Pension Plan. So if you want to go out to an event and actually learn more about the pension plan here in Alberta, there's pros and cons for both, and different groups doing things. I know APP is putting some on. There's also a train the trainer being done by the Makels that we know. There's also a few NDP are putting those on and saying, don't go for the Alberta pension plan, go for the Canada pension plan. So again, another resource that you guys can go and check out here as well. So yeah, just to get back to some of the questions, and of course the lawsuits was a big thing, and this has come up a couple of times. Is there a short summary of expert testimony that might become available for use in the legal hearings? I'm just going to say the entire NCI report is available, right?
Yeah, what you can do is, once again, my suggestion to you is, if you're looking for a particular type of testimony, there was, I think, 92 different experts, world-renowned experts that testified at the NCI. And so if you're interested in a certain area of expertise, go to the table of contents, section 8, find that area that you're interested in, read it, and it will list to you who the experts were that we relied upon in our conclusions. And then you go to the NCI website, go to the hearings, find that person in the particular day, and then watch their testimony, and you'll get exactly what you want, who the person is, what they were saying, and you'll also have a transcript of their actual remarks.
So to get a little farther into that and clarify that, the testimony in the NCI very likely would not be admissible as evidence. However, by identifying the witnesses and the experts that have the information, if you were involved in something that was going to go to court, you could reach out to them, get affidavits, and go through the proper procedure to bring that expert witness testimony into court.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, the NCI report is like an encyclopedia of what happened, an encyclopedia that contains who it affected and how. And you use that just like you would. I guess I'm older, and I remember when we had those big sets of encyclopedias.
30 books of the Encyclopedia Britannica or whatever it was.
Well, yeah, you can see I've still got some, if I can get my finger to work right here.
Yeah, that's right. I know. Yeah, we don't do that anymore. We Wikipedia everything, and even that's not true. So I hope that answers Judy's question. She said, are these legal for charges in court eventually if we get a new government or RCMP doing the job? They, like Chris's paraphrased, answered, no, not really, but they're a good resource that could be used. And again, comments like
Barry, sorry, I have to interrupt here for a moment.
Sure.
I'm gonna have to punt out here, fellas. The weather's not great. It's quite icy. My daughter's driving, and I don't want to distract her while she's driving. So I'm going to say thank you for doing the webinar, Ken, and thanks, Kerry, for hosting. And I'm gonna have to take off.
Okay. Well, drive safe, Chris. And we'll talk to you later. Thanks, Chris.
Right on.
Okay.
You bet.